From a perspective of a retail precious metal investor, I think we can all agree that a precious metals confiscation is perhaps our worst nightmare. Now, you buy gold to protect your finances from economic or monetary crisis, only to have it taken away from you by your government. Besides losing your protective buffer, you could lose a significant portion of your net worth. So what exactly is gold confiscation? Well, in contrast to securities and real estate, gold confiscation may sound absurd to investors. Nevertheless, it has happened enough times in the past to be a concern for those worried about unsustainable debt levels, runaway government spending, and continuous central bank money creation. In grabbing people's savings, governments don't bother confiscating instruments like stocks and bonds or savings accounts because devaluing the currency can wipe them out. When times get tough, however, governments have requested citizens to turn over their gold, the one asset that they've historically been unable to control since it's not someone else's liability. Unfortunately, there aren't many viable solutions when gold is confiscated. If your government declares it illegal to own a meaningful amount of bullion, you'd perhaps have little choice but to comply. Either that or, become a fugitive and face penalties, confiscation of your metal, and even maybe jail time. Now, since gold is not part of the monetary system like it was during the 1933 U.S. nationalization, many investors believe gold will not be confiscated today. In spite of that fact, we are not on a gold standard today. If the crisis gets bad enough, and all viable solutions could be considered. As an example, all developed countries have unpayable debt, especially when you factor in unfunded liabilities. Where could the government find the funds to service them all? Well, there is definitely a possibility that gold could be a source. Although the risk of gold confiscation is lower than in the past, it's not zero. Things that were once considered local can quickly escalate and have global consequences in today's uncertain world. This does not suggest a gold confiscation is imminent or even likely, simply that it could occur if one or a series of events with worldwide implications occur. Now today, there are few specific motivations to confiscate gold than in previous confiscations, since most major currencies are no longer backed by gold. As you'll see, even without a gold standard, modern governments continue to do the same, in a bid to slow down market-driven devaluation. Now, the internet is full of speculation about what one might do if gold were confiscated again. Despite their popularity, most common solutions don't hold up under scrutiny. Silver is assumed to be exempt by some investors. It's usually because gold was the primary target of past confiscations. Silver wasn't part of the monetary system. Many investors are unaware that Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6814, which provided that all silver to be delivered to the United States for a coinage, a year after the 1933 gold confiscation order. Numismatic coins are claimed to be excluded by many dealers. Rare coin collectors were granted an exception in 1933, while history reveals that in past confiscations, it was the investor's responsibility to prove he or she was a coin collector and not a bullion buyer. You were automatically deemed a bullion owner, not a collector, unless you owned a substantial amount of rare coins. And no one knows how new laws might be enforced or what from a confiscation could take. That's part of the problem. It all boils down to this. The government makes the rules, changes the rules, and enforces them. In spite of its lack of moral authority, it is capable of creating legal authority. The government can turn a blind eye to the Constitution even though it lacks constitutional authority. The Constitution did not prevent the government in 1933 from stealing gold from the people. A political leader can do and will do whatever he or she deems necessary at the time, whatever they deem appropriate as long as they think it's necessary. In light of the possibility of a gold confiscation, how long could it last? How easily the government could change the rules, and how deeply it could affect gold investors, all set against a backdrop of a monetary or economic crisis. It underscores the need for a viable strategy. Confiscation of gold is a possibility. As we all know, it has happened in the past. Globally, a few noteworthy gold confiscations have occurred since 1933. Despite the differences in circumstances, they all emerged from a financial crisis. As government coffers dried up, politicians grabbed private citizens' net worth in many cases. This was presented as patriotic. Your country is at risk, help save it. Now let's dive in and talk about some of the gold confiscations that have taken place in the past 90 years. The United States gold confiscation of 1933. As part of Executive Order 6102, President Roosevelt signed a law on April 5, 1933, prohibiting the hoarding of gold coins, bullion, and gold certificates within the continental United States. It meant that private owners had to exchange their gold bars, gold coins, or gold certificates for US dollars at the prevailing rate of $20.67 per ounce at a bank. Now, what motivated him to do this? The US was on a gold standard at the time, so hoarding gold money was seen as a threat to its financial stability. There were bank closures, unemployment soared, bread lines formed, civil unrest grew, and the government couldn't pay its debt. As the Great Depression was already 4 years old, it showed no signs of ending. Roosevelt desperately needed to remove the constraint on the Federal Reserve that prevented it from increasing the money supply. 9 months after making gold illegal to own, the president raised the official price to $35 per ounce. Dollars received in exchange for the gold had just been devalued by 40% overnight. As amended by the Emergency Banking Act of 1933, violations of the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917 were punished by a fine of up to $10,000 or 10 years in prison. Several individuals and companies were prosecuted. Great Britain's gold ban, 1966. A decline in the currency of Great Britain has been occurring since 1931, when it went off the gold standard. Investors began storing gold overseas as the decline stretched into decades, worried that their country might never recover. Can you blame them? There was a threat to their standard of living. In 1966, the government banned citizens from owning more than 4 precious metals coins to stem the decline in the pound sterling. Additionally, it blocked imports of gold coins similar to modern-day tariffs on gold imports in countries like India, which prevent currency from being exported. Owning more than 4 coins was only permitted if you were a collector. A Bank of England officer would determine whether you were a legitimate collector after you applied for a license. If your license was not approved, they would simply take your bullion. An important distinction about this gold ban that it occurred before Great Britain was on the gold standard. Therefore, gold has historically been confiscated without being a part of the monetary system. Neither gold nor silver are part of the monetary system today. The law lasted a full 13 years, as most confiscations do, until 1979. Australia Gold Confiscation, 1959. The law, part of the Banking Act in 1959, allowed gold seizures of private citizens if the governor determined it was expedient so to do for the protection of the currency or of the public credit of the Commonwealth. Therefore, it became legal to seize gold from private citizens and exchange it for paper money. Now, you were also not allowed to sell gold except to the Reserve Bank of Australia, their central bank. You could not export gold, send it outside of the country without permission from the bank. The law still destroyed the local gold market overnight, regardless of whether active seizures were carried out or how many citizens complied. Are you starting to see a trend? A few things are common to these three gold confiscations. Number 1. All types of bullion hoarding are completely prohibited. Only true collectors and rare pieces were exempt, and you were required to prove it. It is interesting to note that none of these confiscations included gold jewelry. Number 2. Resulted from an economic crisis. Governments had abused their finances so badly that they eventually nationalized citizens' privately held gold. Number 3. It lasted a long period of time. 13 years was the shortest period of confiscation in these advanced economies. And number 4. They were imposed by Western governments. The countries in question were among the richest on the planet, and they were advanced societies. Yet, all of them still confiscated gold. Next up, we'll go over the other nations that have imposed gold confiscations. Germany's confiscation of Czech gold. The Bank of International Settlements, headed by Bank of England Director Otto Niemeyer, a German no less instructed the Bank of England to transfer 5.6 million of gold from the Czech National Bank to the Reichsbank after the invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1939. Now, gold belonged to the Czechoslovakian government, but despite warnings from the English government, the transfer went through without incident. Later that year, the German central bank understated its official reserves to hide the theft. Italy's gold confiscation of 1935. During a severe recession in 1935, Italy's prime minister turned dictator and introduced the Gold for the Fatherland initiative. As part of his campaign, he encouraged the public to voluntarily donate their gold rings, necklaces, and other forms of gold to the government. It is even reported that even his wife, Rachel, donated her wedding ring in a show of solidarity, in exchange for a steel wristband bearing the words, "Gold for the Fatherland." Now the gold was melted down into gold bars, which were distributed to the country's banks. As a result of citizens' donations, the government seized around 1.2 million ounces of gold. In the event of a crisis, we may be faced with a lethal combination, a desperate government with your assets at its disposal. Now, all of this isn't meant to predict, a gold confiscation. It is important to be aware of the risk and have a plan in place if one arises. Perhaps a solution. Does such a strategy exist? As far as protection against such an egregious act goes, there seem to be few options other than renouncing citizenship and perhaps leaving the country. However, there are a few strategies that have historically been effective in combating gold confiscation. It makes sense to store gold and silver where governments are less likely to be able to reach them quickly and easily. First, As many have noted before, keeping it outside the banking system is a good idea. Banks have been reported to hypothecate gold, lend it out to someone other than its rightful owner, putting it at risk. The modern bail-ins we have seen in debt-stricken countries often involve banks working with governments to seize assets before the citizens discover what was happening. Banks face the threat of being cut off from central bank liquidity, so they are not known for fighting for the consumers in court to stop overreach, as would an independent vault provider. You know my saying when it comes to precious metals: a wise man trusts nobody. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.